SpaceX put in these Starlink terms and agreements that there's a bylaws in regards to how their service will be treated for people on Mars. And so SpaceX is already looking down that path and seeing, okay, well, we can have Starlink satellites around Earth in orbit, but then we can also put them in orbit around Mars and then just connect the two and have, this expansive, not just a global satellite system, but a multi-planetary satellite system.
Experts estimate that there are around 70 million households worldwide that are good candidates for satellite-based consumer broadband and have the capacity to pay. By the time that SpaceX is done building out its global Starlink satellite system, known as a constellation, the company will have launched about 12,000 satellites. And although not yet approved by the FCC, SpaceX has requested permission to launch an additional 30,000 satellites, which would bring their total to 42,000.
Hey, I'm Steven and this is Solving the Money Problem. If you're new, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. So in this video, we're discussing SpaceX's Starlink broadband internet service, the next $1 trillion company. So let's get into the video. And by the way, since I know there's a lot of crypto lovers watching and people who like free stuff, it's your lucky day. For a limited time, you can get up to $250 in free crypto bonuses when funding a new account on BlockFi, where you can use cryptocurrency to earn interest, borrow cash, and buy or sell crypto. If you want your free crypto, use the link in the description. It also helps out the channel. And if you'd like up to 2 free stocks, check out the link in the description to WeBull. If you open a new account, you'll get 1 free stock valued up to $250 just for opening an account. And if you fund your account with $100, you'll get a second free stock valued up to $1,600. Unless you don't like free stocks, that is. And if you're in Australia, the UK, or New Zealand, you can get a free stock with stake, also using the link in the description. Let's get back to it.
In the most remote parts of the US, reliable internet is still hard to come by. 42 million Americans still don't have access to broadband.
This is actually a really shocking number to me. 42 million, that's well over 10% of the US population still today in 2021 doesn't even have access to broadband internet. And we're talking about the United States of America, never mind the rest of the world.
This is a 9.5 acre homestead in Idaho, and when we first got here, we had 0 cell service. We tried to put boosters at the top, we tried to put boosters at the bottom, we tried to put boosters anywhere we could. We had no cell service, so we really needed some good, reliable internet. And then Starlink came along.
Experts estimate that there are around 70 million households worldwide that are good candidates for satellite-based consumer broadband and have the capacity to pay. Amid a global pandemic that's kept employees from going to offices and children from schools, the need for universal broadband has become undeniable. If the service expands to its intended global customer base, Starlink could be key to SpaceX's success and Elon Musk's vision for a colony on Mars.
I think it's fair to say that the majority of SpaceX's valuation today is tied to the Starlink business model. Generally speaking, the global launch industry is about a $5 billion a year industry. SpaceX, in previous discussions, has talked about a $30 billion a year opportunity in the Starlink business, looking about 3 to 5 years out.
The basis of Starlink's internet service involves 3 components: a satellite dish, ground stations, and the satellites themselves. The service is meant for customers like Lorden and Racer, who live in a sparsely populated area that's not being served by traditional internet companies.
Given the high cost of laying cable or fiber, which can be as much as $20,000 a kilometer, terrestrial service providers tend to focus on urban and suburban areas where there's high density. It simply does not make economic sense to reach out to consumers in low density areas.
This is a really important point. Think about the cost difference between laying cable, not in your bathroom, I mean in the ground, to deliver somebody a broadband internet service and paying around $20,000 per kilometer to lay those cables versus launching on reusable rockets with very low launch costs dozens, hundreds of satellites at a time to provide broadband internet service to similar numbers of people. This cost advantage belongs solely to SpaceX's Starlink service. There is no other company on Earth besides SpaceX who has reusable rockets. Therefore, there is no other company on Earth who can launch satellites into space to provide satellite broadband internet access to any customers on Earth for a comparably low price. It's just not possible. The only way to get close is to use SpaceX to launch your competing satellites, which is going to be a shit ton of revenue for SpaceX anyway. I mean, tough situation to be in. I really want to emphasize this. It's extremely rare that a company enters a space and has such a competitive advantage.
Starlink customers pay $499 for the hardware needed to connect to the network, and an additional $99 per month for the service. Currently, there are no data usage caps or contracts. So far, SpaceX has launched over 1,000 satellites into orbit, but the company plans to deploy 4,425 satellites by 2024. By the time that SpaceX is done building out its global Starlink satellite system, known as a constellation, the company will have launched about 12,000 satellites. And although not yet approved by the FCC, SpaceX has requested permission to launch an additional 30,000 satellites, which would bring their total to 42,000.
Now, I can't help but notice the hidden 420 in that particular number. Let me know in the comments below if you think this is a total accident or if Elon Musk had something to do with this. I have a funny feeling that Elon's like, you know what, it's going to be 40,000, let's just bump it 2,000 so we can have a little bit of a meme laugh behind the scenes. Let me know. In either case, think about how many satellites that is. 42,000 satellites. Maybe you have no idea. How many is that? Is that like 1% of the world's satellites launched to date? Is that 10%? Let's have a look. Here we are on trusty Wikipedia. So in total, about 8,900 satellites have been launched ever from Earth since 1957. There's about 5,000 of them still in orbit today, and only about 40% of those are actually operational, around 1,900 satellites. So let's think about this. Doesn't matter which number you pick, let's use the most conservative number. Total satellites launched in the lifetime of humans launching satellites from Earth ever, in the last 60 years, give or take. SpaceX is looking to launch about 5 times more than the total global number of satellites ever launched in the history of our species, just for the Starlink broadband internet service. Does that give you a sense of the scale of this project and the size of the opportunity? Literally blanketing the entire planet, every square mile in Starlink broadband internet service. That includes the oceans, the Peruvian jungles, the Himalayan mountaintops, and everywhere in between. This is a huge, huge, huge undertaking. I just wanted to give you guys a sense of the scale. I mean, this is just batshit insane.
Unlike traditional internet satellites, which are as big as a school bus and orbit at around 36,000 kilometers above Earth's surface, Starlink satellites are much smaller and closer, at about 550 kilometers above Earth's surface. But the satellite's closer placement means they can see less of the Earth at any given point in time, which is why SpaceX needs so many. On the flip side, SpaceX claims that this closer orbit allows the system to have a lower signal delay, known as latency.
I find it kind of funny that CNBS have said that SpaceX claimed that having their satellites closer to Earth will reduce latency. I mean, this is just basic physics, alright? Less distance for the signal to travel, all other things being equal, obviously there's going to be less latency. Less time, duh. And those of you who like to click domes, will understand why low latency is so important.
Latency is important for things like video streaming and gaming. Lorden says speeds vary according to factors like weather, but on average he's been getting speeds of about 75 megabits per second for downloads and around 12 megabits per second for uploads. In a filing to the FCC, SpaceX said that Starlink services, quote, meeting and exceeding speeds of 100 megabits per second for downloads and 20 megabits per second for uploads. Musk has said that he expects the service will double in speed by the end of the year. To do this, the company is developing a technology known as inter-satellite links.
The basic premise is that you have an optical sensor, which is effectively a laser, that points from one satellite and connects to another optical sensor on another satellite and creates this, unseen path from one to the other. That's this stable connection, almost like a wire. And if you have that stable connection, you can drastically increase the speed because you're now moving signal from one satellite to the other at the speed of light rather than the speed of whatever's on the ground.
On the consumer side, Lorden says that working with the technology was simple. SpaceX does not currently provide an installation service, so users are on their own for the most part.
They ship and deliver a big old box to your door, and inside that box, it's really not that many items. It would be the Starlink dish itself, the router, the power supply, and the little tripod mount to set the dish on. And it's super straightforward. Starlink actually has an app that you can download on the phone, and it walks you through everything. Literally just plug this thing into the wall and put the dish where the app tells you to put the dish.
Starlink's dish comes equipped with a built-in heating element, which keeps it free of snow and ice. It's also motorized, allowing the dish to automatically orient itself to stay aligned with the satellites overhead.
Plug and play is definitely the way to go here, and SpaceX have got it nailed with the early Starlink hardware. You literally get a box shipped to you with everything you need, plug it in, point the satellite at the sky, the app will tell you exactly where to point it, and you're online. Simple as that. Idiot proof. I love it.
SpaceX has been tremendously successful in their launch business, dominating the industry in just 10 years. However, the launch industry, global launch industry, is not a large enough market to subsidize Elon Musk's dream of building a colony on Mars.
The key to Musk's vision for colonizing Mars is Starship. The massive rocket is meant to be fully reusable and capable of launching up to 110 tons of cargo at once. Though SpaceX has not revealed how much it's spent on the Starship program, in the past, Musk has estimated that it would cost the company about $5 billion to complete. That's where Starlink comes in.
The decision to move into Starlink gives the company a market adjacency that's significantly larger in size and has the potential to generate the types of revenues and profits that would be needed for that Mars colony.
Spot on. In fact, over a year ago, I made a video discussing this very topic. I'll put a card in the corner. Starlink will fund the Mars colony. The whole reason that Starlink exists is to pay for Mars, to establish the colony there. That's the only reason we have Starlink. Imagine being Elon, you're sitting there and maybe you've smoked some DMT or you might be tripping balls. I'm just hypothesizing here. Maybe Elon's never done that. Anyway, and you're trying to think, how do we pay for Mars? Well, the launch business won't do it. The global launch industry is not big enough. But if we have reusable rockets with extremely low launch costs, what businesses can we build on top of that would produce insane cash flow to actually pay for Mars? Starlink is the answer. You really do have to take a moment to just appreciate Elon's ingenuity with coming up with this idea, this business. Not only did reusable rockets need to happen, but then Elon needed to figure out a way on top of that to actually make a viable business to provide the cash flow to colonize Mars by shipping hundreds of tons of material there.
The intended markets for Starlink measure in the tens of billions of dollars, ranging from consumers to enterprises and mobility applications, including vessels at sea and aircraft in flight.
Starlink is absolutely perfect for aircraft and for ships, both commercial and private. Just imagine if every airline on Earth signs up to Starlink to offer their passengers high speed, not really slow, high speed, low latency broadband internet access across all of their international flights. Just imagine this. I just want to explain something too, because a little bit of perspective might help. Let's have a look at Google Earth for a moment. So this is Earth. Where the fuck is the land? A lot of people don't realize this, but the majority of Earth is ocean. It is not landmass. And it makes no economical sense to lay the cables and the infrastructure to provide equivalent broadband internet access to every square mile, centimeter, kilometer of Earth, whatever measurement system you want to use. It makes no sense to provide high quality, high speed broadband internet access to this part of the planet because there's literally no people here. Well, apart from a few flying over in aircraft and a few random people inhabiting some small islands. The point is, Starlink changes this completely. The Starlink internet constellation will completely blanket the entire planet, the entire surface of the Earth, not just the parts that are heavily populated. So think about all the ships on the oceans, the boats, the Air Force, Navy, military operations, etc. suddenly having access to extremely high quality broadband internet for the very first time. This is going to be an absolute game changer.
Starlink's initial focus on consumers is a byproduct of the way that the satellites are launched and the coverage that they provide. Currently, Starlink is not able to provide an enterprise-grade service, so the company is leading with consumers that are a little bit more tolerant.
In the past, Starlink's been used by emergency responders in Washington, where the satellites are manufactured to set up an internet connection in areas devastated by wildfires. The US Air Force and the Army are also both testing Starlink. There is a huge hunger for investment in satellite internet. The sector could be worth $412 billion by 2040. Last year, the FCC awarded Starlink nearly $1 billion in subsidies to bring internet to rural areas. And in late March, President Biden said that his administration would spend $100 billion to expand broadband access to Americans as part of its $2 trillion infrastructure plan. SpaceX is also in talks with the UK, where Starlink could earn funding as part of the country's $6.9 billion internet infrastructure program.
Although Starlink won't need them, subsidies will provide very strong tailwinds for the service over the next few years. I won't be surprised if Starlink ultimately becomes a recipient of multiple billions of dollars of incentives.
Starlink's potential is huge, provided that the project can overcome some major hurdles.
Satellite broadband as a whole is a industry and a sector that is just littered with warning signs and the corpses of former companies that have tried to go out and do what Starlink is doing already.
It's a little discussed secret that all of the successful satellite operators today were subsidized either through government subsidies or through the bankruptcy court in the case of companies like Iridium and Orbcomm that went bankrupt in the 1990s only to recover and come back for a second act. One of the challenges of building out a new satellite network is all of the capital expenditure needs to go up front before the very first customer can be signed up. And that creates a really tough financial model in terms of generating the revenue to both pay for the existing constellation as well as the follow-on satellites that will be needed to continue the service.
Yep. Before SpaceX had reusable rockets, the cost to launch satellites was astronomical. I get it. Oh, that was bad. Anyway, it's come down quite a bit now, but only if you use SpaceX. So these previous companies that were attempting to offer satellite internet services were paying astronomical launch costs, and they needed to launch a shit ton of satellites before they had a reasonable service to provide to customers. You can't launch 12 satellites and now you got broadband satellite internet service anywhere. It doesn't work like that. You need really widespread coverage. But now that SpaceX has come along and has reusable rockets, this is now a viable business model. But as I mentioned earlier, unless you have reusable rockets, which currently there is only one company on Earth offering these, SpaceX, you either need to use SpaceX to launch your competing service, or you just don't bother competing. I really see Starlink running away with this marketplace. I don't see any other companies launching comparable amounts of mass to orbit on reusable rockets for years, probably 5+. And SpaceX will continue to drive the cost of their launches down, and they'll be at scale, producing their satellites at scale, which means the cost of their satellites will also be down. I mean, how do you even compete with that, even if eventually you can try to catch up and start launching out your own competing network when Starlink already has the Earth blanketed in satellites? And keeping in mind that Starlink has designed their satellites to deorbit after just a couple of years, so they'll be doing additional launches to replenish with the latest hardware. How do you even try to enter this market? It's like somebody coming along now and trying to take down Google with their search engine or Amazon with retail. I mean, it is technically possible, but how are you going to do it? That's the big question. I'm not sure anyone's going to be able to. I really see Starlink running away with this one. And that all just boils down to SpaceX being the only company on Earth with reusable rockets. And don't nitpick in the comments with stuff that can launch about 2 grams to orbit. I'm talking about launching a decent payload to orbit, you nerds.
SpaceX's leadership about 2 or 3 years ago estimated that they thought it would cost upwards of $10 billion to get Starlink running at an operational capacity. That's probably a pretty fair estimate still today.
Starlink is still fairly early on in development, so it's not perfect. SpaceX makes this clear on its website, saying that there may be periods when customers experience no connectivity. But service will improve as the company launches more satellites. And with the lifetime of Starlink satellites only being around 5 years, experts are also worried about space debris. An idea known as the Kessler Syndrome summarizes just how detrimental having free-floating junk in space can be.
The Kessler Syndrome can be described as 2 satellites that collide and they create more debris that will collide with other satellites, and this creates orbits that are just unusable.
For its part, SpaceX has said that it plans to deorbit satellites that are nearing the end of their life by pushing them back into Earth's atmosphere, where they burn up during re-entry.
All of SpaceX's satellites have propulsion systems on board, which theoretically are more than sufficient to deorbit a satellite in a very reasonable period of time. However, if the satellite communication is lost, which has happened in certain cases, you lose the ability to tell the satellite to deorbit itself. In other cases, the propulsion system itself may have failed. And when you're launching over 4,000 satellites, all it takes is a very small failure rate to create a lot of space debris.
Plans to spin off Starlink into a separate company have been swirling since last year. And earlier this year, Musk confirmed the idea.
Elon Musk again making headlines this morning, this time with SpaceX, saying its broadband satellite business will go public eventually. Musk tweeting, quote, "Once we can predict cash flow reasonably well, Starlink will IPO," but warning that the business will need to pass through a, quote, "deep chasm of negative cash flow over the next year or so to actually make that financially viable."
Spinning off the part of SpaceX that has the most earning potential may seem counterintuitive, but experts say there could be some benefits.
Right now, Starlink is a huge cash use for the SpaceX business. And if it were spun out independently and charging back, paying SpaceX for those launches, it would obviously boost the revenues of the remaining SpaceX business.
If SpaceX is still the majority owner of Starlink after it spins off, then the company can still see that revenue stream, still see the benefits of that service but it's then de-risking the overall space company, if you will, by having it operate as this separate business, so that if Starlink does fail or does go bankrupt or something bad happens to Starlink, then it's not damaging the core SpaceX business as much as it would as if it was still in the entire private fold of the company.
Let me know in the comments below if you would be interested in buying Starlink stock at or after the IPO. Personally, I'd be super interested, providing the numbers make sense. Now, I have nothing to back this up, but I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that if Starlink was to debut today on the stock market, it literally just IPO'd this afternoon, a funny feeling the company would probably be worth somewhere between $100 to $150 billion today, despite a tiny number of users. Why? Lots of Elon fanboys, lots of people wanting to get on the ground floor, and more importantly, lots of people who've actually looked at the opportunity here, projected out to 2030 and beyond and went, holy hell. Not only is the opportunity huge, but with the reusable rockets, I don't see anyone competing with them. They're going to build out their network before anyone else even has the chance. This is scary. This opportunity is just nuts.
SpaceX is currently the leader in low Earth orbit satellite internet, but competition is heating up. Amazon has said that it will invest over $10 billion in its satellite internet network known as Project Kuiper. UK satellite maker OneWeb recently launched another 36 satellites into orbit, bringing its total number to 146. The company says it expects to begin limited service by the end of the year, though unlike SpaceX, its service is geared towards enterprise customers. Finally, Canadian satellite company Telesat has said that it will begin commercial services for its satellite internet in the second half of 2023. If Starlink is successful, it may ultimately do more than just fund Musk's vision for a colony on Mars.
SpaceX put in these Starlink terms and agreements that there's a bylaws in regards to how their service will be treated for people on Mars. And so SpaceX is already looking down that path and seeing, okay, well, we can have Starlink satellites around Earth in orbit, but then we can also put them in orbit around Mars and then just connect the two and have, this expansive, not just a global satellite system, but a multi-planetary satellite system.
So before we wrap up, let's just do some really rough numbers to see what the potential in Starlink might be over the longer term. Around 1 billion people on Earth today currently live in rural areas. Let's just assume really rough numbers, use your own, don't get your panties in a twist, this is just an example. Let's just say that 10% of these people over time become Starlink customers. We're now looking at about 100 million Starlink users. Let's say this is 2030 or so, right? How much are they paying each per month? Well, today the service is $99. I'm going to be sort of conservative, won't go quite down to $50, maybe somewhere in the middle. Let's call it $65 per month. So we're going to multiply this by $65 per month and then multiply that out by a year to get the annual revenue. We're looking at around $78 billion of annual revenue. Now, maybe you think that I'm too aggressive with my estimates. Maybe the service is going to cost less. Great, cool, whatever. Let's cut this down to say $50 billion. Could be less, that's okay. Maybe even $25 billion. Now, what happens if we add, say, a 30 multiple to this number, just to be really conservative? I'm going to say $50 billion times 30. We get to about a $1.5 trillion valuation. Again, use your own numbers. I'm just trying to illustrate the point here. The opportunity with Starlink is truly enormous. Per the title of this video, Starlink is the next trillion-dollar company. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. First of all, what do you think of the Starlink internet service and the business model? Personally, I think it's absolutely genius. Second of all, are you interested in becoming a Starlink customer, or are you already using the service? And third, what do you think Starlink, the company, could be worth in 10 years' time? I'm Stephen Mark Ryan, this is Solving the Money Problem, and I love you all. And don't forget, if you'd like up to $250 in free crypto bonuses with BlockFi, use the link in the description. You can also get 2 free stocks with WeBull and a free stock with Stake, also linked in the description. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if you have any ideas for future videos, let me know. I read all your comments. P.S. If you're still watching, you're awesome. If you'd like early access, exclusive videos, regular Q&As, our private Discord server and more, consider supporting the channel at patreon.com/solvingthemoneyproblem so I can keep creating content for you guys. There's a link in the description. You can now also become a member of the channel for some exclusive perks. To learn more, click the join button next to subscribe. And don't forget to check out our merch store. Either way, the best form of support is you being here and watching, so thanks again.